They never heard me say a single true thing for 11 years, and that was the part that kept the peace. I want to be exact about it, because exactness is the only thing I've ever been good at, and because the people who will tell this story after me will want it to be louder than it was. It was not loud. For most of it, I was sitting on a stool that was too tall for the human frame and slightly too short for everyone else's, in front of a console that fit none of us, drinking a hot brown liquid the Concord had approved for my species after running it through 9 committees, and I was bored. That is the honest shape of the day threshold relay went dark. A bored woman on a bad stool, and the rest of the galaxy finding out what I had been saying the whole time. Threshold relay was not a glamorous post. It hung at a waypoint the Concord called a Severance node, which is the polite Celestine term for a place no one important wanted but everyone needed, the way a doorway is needed and never admired. 4 shipping lanes braided together there and came apart again, and ships of 9 species passed through close enough to shout, except no one shouted, because shouting was not possible on threshold relay. The Accord matrix did not allow it. I should explain the matrix, because the matrix is the whole story, and because I have noticed that beings who grow up inside a thing rarely understand what the thing is doing to them. The Accord matrix was the Concord's great civilizing engine. It was not a translator, though everyone called it that, and I called it that too because the true name took too long. A translator turns one set of words into another. The matrix did that, yes, but it did a second thing under the first, and the second thing was the point. It moderated. It took the raw intent of a sentence, the temperature of it, the edge, the threat coiled inside ordinary grammar, and it rounded that intent toward the median. It found the courteous version of what you meant and gave that to the listener. 2 species that would have gone to war over a phrasing instead heard each other being reasonable, and were reasonable back, and the war did not happen. The Concord had run on this for 900 years. Whole civilizations had forgotten they were ever capable of saying the unforgivable thing, because for 9 centuries the unforgivable thing had quietly been turned into a request to reschedule. It worked. I want that on the record. It worked beautifully for everyone except in one specific and unexamined way for me. Because the matrix had a median to round toward, and the median was built from the species that fed it, and humans had not been part of the galaxy long enough or loudly enough to move the median. We were a small entry in a large book. So when I spoke, the matrix did to me what it did to everyone, but it did it without a human-shaped sense of where the floor was. It heard what I meant. It could not believe what I meant. And it rounded me down, not toward the courteous human, because it had no courteous human to model, but toward the courteous Concord average, which was a soft and frightened and apologetic thing, and it dressed me in that and handed me to the room. For 11 years the room had been meeting a version of me the machine invented, a mild woman, a woman who said please, a woman who, when she described the precise sequence by which she would disassemble a being who was crowding her, was understood to be making a small joke about needing more space at the table. I knew this. That is the part people refuse to believe afterward. They want me to have been a sleeping thing that woke. I was not asleep. I read the registry. I knew what the matrix was doing to my sentences because the registry told me, in the dry way registries tell you the worst things. Earth was logged Severance class. Not class anything numbered. The Concord had run out of numbers for us early and moved to words, and the word they chose meant the clean cut, the thing that ends a connection so completely that no signal returns. Severance class. Below it, in a smaller font, a custodial note, speech intent moderation mandatory, unmoderated transmission of this species not advised in mixed company. Not advised. I used to read that line on slow shifts and feel something I have no good word for. Not pride. Closer to the feeling of carrying a full cup across a crowded room. You are not proud of the cup. You are only very, very careful and very tired of being careful and aware that everyone around you thinks the cup is empty. The Celestine thought the cup was empty. The Celestine ran the matrix. They had built it, or their grandparents' institutions had, and they tended it the way a family tends a vineyard it has owned so long it has stopped tasting the wine. They were a tall, narrow people, four-armed, soft at the joints, with skin the gray of wet slate and voices that came out already gentle, already mediated, as though they had internalized the machine so deeply they no longer needed it for themselves. They were the most civilized beings I have ever met. I do not say that as an insult, though I know how it reads. They were genuinely, deeply civilized, and they mistook that for being safe, and they mistook being safe for being strong, and those are three different things that had never once been pulled apart in their history, because the Matrix had never let anyone test the seams. The custodian on Threshold Relay was a Celethine named Hessam, Curator Adjunct Hessam, the full title, which I never used because it took a full breath. Hessam had 4 hands and used all of them, 2 for work and 2 for emphasis, and a habit of folding the emphasis hands together when he was about to tell me something he thought I would find difficult. He folded them at me often. He thought I found most things difficult. The Matrix had told him so, for 11 years, every time I opened my mouth. "Technician Cole," he said to me that morning, folding the upper hands, "you seem fatigued. The human cycle is unkind. Perhaps you would take rest while I receive the vast delegation." What I said was, "I'm fine, Hessam, I'll take the board." What he heard, I am fairly sure, knowing the Matrix's habits, was something like, "I'm quite all right, thank you, though it is gracious of you to ask, and I would be honored to assist with the board if it is no trouble." The Matrix did that. It added the curtsy I never made. I had stopped minding years ago. There were worse things than being thought polite. The vast delegation was the reason the day had a delegation at all. The VAS were a docking concern, a freight cartel, technically licensed, practically a small navy, and they had a grievance over lane priority that they had escalated past the point where escalating was about lane priority. I had read the dossier. The grievance was a coat. Under the coat was the actual body of the thing. The VAS had decided Threshold Relay was undermanned, underdefended, and worth taking. The Matrix sat here. Control of the Matrix node meant control of every conversation that passed through 4 lanes. You did not have to win a war if you owned the medium the war would be argued in. You could simply edit it. I had flagged this. I had sent the flag up the conquered chain in my own flat words, and the words had gone through the Matrix on their way up, and somewhere a conquered adjudicator had received a transmission from a mild human technician, gently wondering whether the VAS might possibly be considered, when convenient, a slight concern. The flag had been noted. Noted is the conquered word for filed where light does not reach. So no one came. No defense element, no inspector, nothing but the vast delegation itself, arriving in a wedge-hulled cutter that docked harder than docking requires. The way a knock can be a question or an announcement depending entirely on the fist. There were 6 of them. The VAS are a heavy species, low and broad, plated along the back, with a flat reptilian patience to them that I had always found restful right up until that morning, when I understood I had been reading patience where I should have read appetite. Their lead was called Torch. Torch had done business at Threshold before. We had a rapport, by which I mean Torch believed we had a rapport, because the Matrix had spent years handing Torch a warm and deferential human, and Torch had grown fond of her the way you grow fond of a well-trained animal. "Technician," Torch said, settling its bulk into the receiving alcove, plates clicking. "It is good to see a familiar face among the gray ones." A flick of a clawed hand at Hessam. The Matrix smoothed the contempt into something collegial, and Hessam inclined his narrow head, hearing friendship. "Torch," I said, "you docked hard." I meant it as exactly what it was, an observation and a small accusation, and a note that I had logged the velocity and would be logging the next thing too. What Torch heard was warmth. It made a low rolling sound, pleased. We went through the coat. The lane grievance, the priority schedule, the formal language of a complaint that everyone in the room except the Celethine knew was theater. Hessam mediated with his gentle voice and his folding hands, and the Matrix turned all of us into reasonable creatures negotiating in good faith, and the negotiation moved, the way water moves downhill, toward the place the VAS wanted it to go, a temporary transfer of node oversight to a joint authority. Joint. The word the VAS used for a thing they intended to be holding alone by the next cycle. I watched Torsh's plated hands while Hessam talked. The VAS do a thing with their secondary plates when they are about to stop pretending, a small lift, a loosening, the way a man rolls his shoulders before he stands up from a chair he is done sitting in. Torsh's plates lifted. I set my cup down. Not fast. There is never any reason to move fast when you have already decided. Hessam, I said in my flat voice, step back from the console. The Matrix heard me. The Matrix loved me. It took my flat warning and it dressed it in a request, a mild human suggestion that perhaps the curator adjunct might be more comfortable a little further from the equipment. And Hessam, hearing only courtesy, smiled his civilized smile and did not move, and that is when the VAS moved instead. It was not loud. That is the thing I keep returning to. Even the violence on threshold relay was civilized, because the VAS had grown up inside the Matrix too, and the Matrix had trained even their aggression to be polite. Torsh did not roar. It simply rose, and two of its people rose with it, and a fourth produced from somewhere a conquered pattern disruptor that should not have been aboard and certainly should not have been charged, and aimed it not at me, never at me. I was the warm, familiar animal, but at the Matrix core itself. The node is under VAS administration, Torsh said, almost kindly. Curator, you will assist. Technician, you will continue to be useful. It did not even look at me when it said it. Why would it? The Matrix had been telling Torsh for years that I was a chair that poured tea. Hessam made a sound I had never heard a Celethine make. The civilized voice failed him. Underneath it was something thin and high, the noise of a being whose entire world had just been told it ran on permission, and the permission was revoked. He raised all four hands, and the Matrix translated the gesture into surrender, and the VAS with the disruptor read surrender and relaxed by exactly the amount that gets people killed. I had by then been on threshold relay 11 years. I had spent the first of those 11 years learning the station, and the next 10 learning the one thing the station could not protect itself from, and building slowly, in the patient way you build a thing you hope to never need, the answer to it. I am not going to pretend I knew this exact morning was coming. I am going to tell you the truer and worse thing, which is that I knew some morning was, and I had simply decided that when it came I would already be finished preparing, because being finished is the only advantage a small thing ever reliably has over a large one. The disruptor was aimed at the core. A disruptor discharge into the Accord Matrix core would not destroy it. The core was hardened. The Celethine were not fools about their treasure, but it would feed a spike back through the speech moderation lattice, and the lattice was not hardened, because in 900 years no one had ever needed to fire a weapon inside a room the lattice was working in. The lattice had never been asked to moderate the intent of a weapon. It had no median for that. I knew this because I had read the maintenance manuals on slow shifts the way other people read whatever it is other people read. I knew the lattice would take the spike and try, for one heroic and doomed instant, to find the courteous version of a disruptor bolt and fail and brown out, and for some number of seconds, the manual did not say how many, because the manual had never imagined the question threshold relay would have no matrix, no moderation, no median, no machine standing between what beings meant and what beings heard. I did the arithmetic in the time it takes to set down a cup, which I had already done. Then I stood up, which put me roughly at the height of a VAS elbow, and I said the thing I had been not saying for 11 years, and I said it on purpose, timed to the half-second before Torsh gave the order to fire, because I wanted the spike in the air at the same moment my words were, so the room would hear me twice, once through the machine, and once, finally, without it. What I said was simple. I said, don't. through the matrix in its last working instant that came across as it always did. A small human pleasantry. A please don't, a flutter, the chair asking nicely. Torch heard it and felt, I am certain, a flicker of fond regret, the way you feel when the animal you are about to put down looks up at you trusting. Then the vase fired into the core, and the spike went up the lattice, and the lattice tried to make a disruptor bolt polite, and the accord matrix died mid-sentence, my sentence, and the room heard the rest of the word with nothing in between. I have tried many times to describe what it is like to be heard truly for the first time in a decade by people who thought they knew you. The closest I have is this. Imagine you have spent your whole life speaking through a wall of soft cloth, and everyone on the other side has built their entire idea of you out of the muffled shape that came through, and they have decided from that muffled shape that you are gentle, and then the cloth is gone. And you say one more word, the same kind of word you have always said, in the same flat voice you have always used, and it arrives. The word was still don't. It had not changed. I had not raised my voice. I want to be very clear that I did not raise my voice, then or ever, because the people who tell this badly will say I roared, and a roar would have meant I cared, and I did not care, and the not caring is the whole horror of it. The word was the same single syllable. But the cloth was gone, and what arrived in that room was the intent the cloth had been hiding for 11 years, the full unrounded freight of a Severance class being saying don't, which is not a plea. It was never a plea. It was a description of what would happen on the far side of the next motion, delivered as a courtesy I was under no obligation to extend, and the Matrix had been turning that courtesy into a please. Torch stopped. Every plated thing in that body went still at once, not the stillness of a creature deciding. The stillness of a creature that has, very suddenly, and from a source it had filed under harmless, received accurate information about its own death, and is performing the involuntary stock-taking that comes before the body believes it. The vase with the disruptor turned toward me. It had heard the word too. It swung the weapon off the dead core and toward the warm, familiar animal that had just made a sound the Matrix was no longer there to dress, and I watched it try, in real time, to reconcile the chair that poured tea with the thing it had just heard, and fail because there was no median between those two pictures, no courteous average, nothing to round toward. The lattice had spoiled them. None of them had ever in their lives had to assess a threat without a machine pre-digesting it into manners. They did not know how. I knew how. It was the one thing I had never been allowed to stop knowing. I will tell you what I did plainly, because the cold part is the true part, and the true part is the only part worth keeping. I had spent 10 years building the answer, and the answer was not a weapon. A weapon would have been a confession that I was outmatched, and I was not outmatched. I was only small, and small is a different problem with a different solution. The solution was the station. I knew threshold relay the way Hessam knew the Matrix, except I had never stopped tasting the wine. I knew which alcove had a pressure differential 1 seal away from a hard vent. I knew the receiving alcove was that alcove. I knew the manual override for the vent was not on the console the vase had seized, but on a maintenance panel at the height of a human hand and the depth of a human reach, behind me, where a being 11 years convinced I was furniture would never think to watch. I had already opened the panel. I had opened it when I set the cup down. The not moving fast had bought me the one motion that mattered, made early, while 6 predators watched a chair. The disruptor came up. I closed the override. The receiving alcove vented to the dock void in the time it takes a vase to complete the thought begun and never finished, and threshold relays safety lattice, a dumb mechanical thing, no matrix in it, nothing to moderate, the most honest system on the station, sealed the bulkhead between the alcove and the rest of us at the speed it had been built to seal at, which was faster than appetite. I did not watch. There is a kind of person who would tell you they watched to prove they could. I have nothing to prove. I watched the bulkhead, which is a different thing. The bulkhead held. The alcove was quiet. Torch and its people were on the far side of a quiet I had made, and the disruptor was on the floor on this side, having slipped from a hand that no longer had pressure behind it, and the accord matrix was dark, and Hessam was making the thin high sound again, and I picked up the disruptor because leaving a charged weapon on a floor is sloppy, and I am not sloppy. That is the whole of the violence. I have heard it told as a battle. It was a vent and a bulkhead and a woman who had read the maintenance manuals. The cost was real, and I am not going to dress it up. There were beings in that alcove who are not anymore, and that is a thing I did with a switch I had decided to close before any of them decided to die, and I have not lost sleep over it, and I am not going to perform losing sleep for you. They came to take the thing that kept the galaxy from saying what it meant. They got to find out what it meant. That is not justice. I don't believe in justice. It is only accuracy, which is the only thing I have ever been good at. Hessam was staring at me. The Matrix was dead, so he was hearing me raw too, the way the Vass had, except no weapon was pointed at him, and so he had the leisure to understand it slowly, which I think was worse. The Celethine had built the machine that hid me. The Celethine had read the registry note, speech intent moderation mandatory. Unmoderated transmission of this species not advised in mixed company, and the Celethine, of all the species in the Concord, were the ones who had decided the note was an old caution, a folklore, a quaint relic of a more anxious age. They tended the median. They could not imagine a being outside it. And now the median was off, lying dark in its hardened core, and a being from outside it was standing in their receiving room holding a disruptor it had picked up off the floor for tidiness. And Hessam was hearing, for the first time in 11 years, what the woman who poured the tea had actually been saying all along. "Curator," I said, just that to start, because I wanted to watch what one word did to him now. It went into him like cold water. He flinched, a four-armed flinch, all the joints at once. He had heard curator from me 1,000 times, and it had always arrived wrapped, gentle. The address of a deferential subordinate. Now it arrived as it was, flat, exact, a label I was applying to a man so I could tell him a fact. There was no warmth in it because I have no warmth, and the machine had been lending me his for a decade. He understood in that flinch that the kind human he had managed and instructed and folded his hands at had never existed. He had been talking to the cloth. "You," he said, and his civilized voice had not come back because the matrix that lived inside him had relied on the matrix that lived in the wall, and with the wall dark he was as raw as I was. You knew what it made of you, and you let it." "I let it," I agreed. "It kept the peace." I meant that as the plainest thing in the world, and now, unrounded, he heard the plainness, and the plainness was the most frightening thing I could have offered him, because it was true. I had let a machine spend 11 years turning my every sentence into a courtesy because the alternative was a room full of beings reacting accurately to me, and an accurate reaction to me was the thing the conquered could not survive in mixed company. I had been the piece's tax. I had paid it without complaint. The mild human was a price I let the machine charge against my account, so that 900 years of careful quiet could go on not knowing what it was quiet about. "What are you?" Hessam said. Not a question for an answer, the question a man asks the floor. I told him the truth, because the matrix wasn't there to soften it, and I was, frankly, tired of softening it myself. "I'm what the note was about," I said. "I'm what your machine was for. You built a wall 900 years high to keep from hearing the thing that's standing in your receiving room, and you got so good at not hearing it that you decided it was a story. It isn't a story. It was never a story. It was just quiet. You mistook the quiet for safety." I set the disruptor on the dead console gently because I am tidy. "Your wall worked, Hessam. That's the part you'll have trouble with. It worked perfectly. The only thing it never did was make me into the thing it told you I was." He sat down. Celethine do not sit so much as fold downward, and he folded, all four hands loose, and he looked at the dark core of the accord matrix the way a man looks at a parent he has just learned lied to him for his own good. I did not envy him the next several years of his species' reckoning. They were going to have to decide whether to fix the machine, which would mean choosing again to never hear me, or leave it, which would mean hearing everyone the way they had just heard me, which no medium had ever survived. That was their problem. I had a station to put back together and a conquered chain to file an accurate report up, except the chain would round my report through the next working matrix node and turn my accuracy back into a mild human, gently noting that there had been a small incident. I want to end on the part I think about, because it is the part that matters and it is not the part anyone wants. The matrix rebooted. Of course it did. The core was hardened, the lattice was not, but the lattice was repairable, and a celethine repair crew came within the cycle and repaired it, because the conquered could no more live without its wall than a body can live with its skin off. It took them 9 hours. For 9 hours Threshold Relay had no median, and for 9 hours I spoke to the repair crew and the arriving inspectors and the relief custodian in my own flat, unrounded voice. And they heard me, all of them accurately, and they were careful with me in a way no one had been careful with me in 11 years. The careful of beings carrying a full cup across a crowded room. Then at the 9th hour, a junior tech keyed the final sequence, and the lattice came up with a soft chime, and the wall was back. And the relief custodian, a younger celethine who had spent 9 hours being correctly afraid of me, opened her mouth to ask me a routine question about node handoff, and I answered her in my same flat voice, the only voice I have ever had, and the machine took my answer and rounded it down, and dressed it in the curtsy I never made, and handed her a mild and gentle and apologetic human. I watched her hear it. I watched the fear leave her. I watched the wall do its work, smooth and instant and merciful, turning the thing she had spent 9 hours knowing back into a story she could file away as folklore. And I watched her relax by exactly the amount that gets people killed, and I did not warn her again, because I had warned the last one, and warning is a courtesy, and I am under no obligation to extend it. She smiled at me. The wall had told her it was safe too. I picked up my cup. The brown liquid had gone cold during the incident. It does that. The conquered has never approved a warmer one. I drank it cold, which is how I prefer it anyway, and I took the board and I said, "Welcome to Threshold Relay." And the machine turned it into something kind, and she heard kindness, and I let her, because the piece is worth a great deal, and the price of it is only that no one ever knows what I am saying. That is the part, not the vent, not the bulkhead, not the 6 who came to take the wall and found out what the wall was for. The part is the smile of a being who is safe only because a machine is lying to her on my behalf, and my willingness, every shift, every cycle, 11 years and counting, to let the lie stand. The galaxy thinks it is peaceful. I let it think so. Somebody has to pour the tea.